Good evening, everyone. I am your host and instructor, Laney Shaughnessy, and welcome to Spindle TV, your best source for CNC CAD/CAM training videos. Spindle TV is brought to you by Digital Woodcarver, inspiring your creativity and providing you with the tools to create your own unique masterpieces. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you with us tonight, with me tonight. I'm looking forward to this class because I always try to explain when I'm helping a customer or something. I'm always trying to explain the best way to look at at your approach, the way you approach your designing and things, and use the tools that are available to you to help you assist with that. And a couple of the tools and design approaches we're going to look at tonight is we're going to look at guidelines, how to use our guidelines effectively to help us with layout and things. And then basic ways that we can take, general shapes or designs, and we can kind of break them down in their simplest form, most simplest form, and build from scratch from that, from that simplicity, create, ultimately our end result. Now, tonight I'm going to be working in Vectric Aspire, but everything that I'm going to be doing can be done in Desktop Pro and Aspire. The reason why I'm working in Aspire is that after everything is said and done, I'd like to take a few minutes to kind of turn this object, this vector that's created, that we create. By the way, it's going to be a Maltese Cross, a firefighter symbol, Maltese style cross. But I'd like to be able to take that one step further at the end and turn it into a model, 3D it into a model and stuff. So I'm going to be working in Aspire tonight, but everything that I'm doing is basically, can be done in all three of the programs, and it can be set up for doing V carving, of the design and everything, and profile cutting and pocket cutting and stuff. But I do want to take it one step further and create a model of it when it's all said and done. It's a very simple project, and so it shouldn't be too complicated. And hopefully, you take a look at the way I approach things and see how that approach helps me create unique shapes and things, and then maybe utilize some of the things that you pick up from tonight's class in your future designing and stuff throughout the Vectric program and stuff. So I'm looking forward to it. I believe everybody is popping in, and I want to welcome everybody, from ones I can see, Debbie and Kevin and Roger, Reginald, Ralph, Ronnie, Vicky, and Dave Williams. I want to thank you all for coming in, and I'm sure more that will be joining us as time comes. But let's go ahead and let's get into things. And bear with me a second while I get set up over here. And let's jump over to the Vectric software. And again, like I said, I'm working in Vectric Aspire. But this is a project that can be created and done in any of the three programs, creating these vectors. And these methods apply to all three programs and stuff. And for those of you that, I'm sure that most 90% of you all are familiar with a Maltese Cross. Now, Maltese Cross has different styles and things. This particular one is the most recognized type of design for firefighter logos and things like that you'll see at fire departments and stuff. And this is what our end result's going to be. This particular shape and everything. And I just wanted to give you a visual of what we're going for. And now let's take a look at how I approach creating this design from scratch. Because one of the things that I want you to know is, like with a Maltese Cross, one, it's a symbol of, hope and safety and security and all, as it, being, firefighters logo and all, but it is an absolute symmetrical piece, and the general design of it could be started with a simple rectangle and a square, and you'll see that here in just a minute. But just know that it's kind of the perfect project for this tutorial, and this could be considered kind of a basics, if you will, on design and layout, or approaching design and layout. Now, before we get started, let me come in here, and I'm going to take my guidelines and I'm going to delete them all. We're going to start with a blank slate, and let's talk about guidelines for just a quick second. Now, guidelines can be found inside of your rulers at the top and left side of the screen, and by taking your mouse over and holding down your left mouse button, you can drag these guidelines out from the side, top and bottom, and you can grab multiple lines, and you can also put them back by dragging them back up into the rulers and things. Now, guidelines have properties. So if we were to take and right click on a guideline, we have our guide properties that we can look at. And in the guide properties, it tells us on that particular guide our current position. And this was the horizontal guide. And our current position right now is 10.1. Now, if I wanted it to be a specific location, let's say I wanted it to be 9.5, I could type that in and click apply to position that guide to a specific position on the board. I can change the angle of the guide. I can change the angle by typing in an angle within this box, or using the slide bar to adjust the angle. So if I needed a 45-degree angle guide, I could type in 45 and click apply, and I could adjust that accordingly. Now, notice how it rotated counterclockwise, that guide and everything. And we're going from 0 being, absolute horizontal, and we're rotating around in that direction. So 0, 45, 90, 135, 180, so on and so forth. And so if I needed that guide to be facing the other direction, then I'd most likely, type in 135 degrees so that it's rotated and facing the other direction, however you may be it. If I need it to be just up and down, that could be 90 or 0, either one. Or I'm not 0, I'm sorry, 0 would be horizontal, but 90 degrees would be up and down, so on and so forth. Now, we can, if we have guidelines in a specific place, we can, and let me get this back to 0 so it's a horizontal guide. If we need a guideline in a specific place and we don't want to accidentally, because if your mouse goes over it, you could accidentally drag that guideline and move it out of position, you can lock the guideline to prevent it from dragging, and that helps out a little bit from time to time when you're moving around and working with a design. You don't want to accidentally move a guideline out of place or something. If you do, it's easy to get back to where you were. Now, with the guideline properties, we have the ability to create parallel guides to that guide, whether it's above or below in the horizontal state, or to the left or the right in the vertical state. We can do an absolute parallel position, then that means we're going by our ruler or our particular absolute position in our material. Or we can do a relative position, which means I'm moving a certain distance or creating a guide parallel to my original an inch away, 2 inches away, 3/4 of an inch away, a specific distance away. When we're creating relative guides, we can, check off select new guide. So all we have to do is keep clicking our button, create new guide, create new guide, create new guide. If we need multiple guides, we're stacking guides a certain distance apart and things. And when we're doing our position or our offset, we're going to be, your x-axis is represented by the width of your screen, x minus to the left, x positive to the right. and your y-axis is by the height of your screen. Y positive is up, y negative is down. So if you need that guide to be created parallel to your original guide lower, if we're going horizontally, then that's going to be a negative number. If it needs to be above the original guide, then that's going to be a positive number. And the same thing for our vertical guides. If we're going to the left, it's a negative number. If we're going to the right, it's a positive number. So if we remember that, we're good to go. Now, guides, you can absolutely come up here and right click on a guide to delete it. You can also go up to your view bar, guidelines, and you have some options here. You have the ability to turn a guide's visibility on or off by checking the guide visible option. You also have the options of deleting all your guides at one time instead of one at a time, and then of course locking all your guides or unlocking them, if you need to do any changes and stuff. Okay, so that's a little bit about guidelines, and hopefully that will kind of just familiarize you with the guideline properties and how to access them. And once again, generally when you move your mouse over the guide, you'll see a double-headed arrow pop up, and at that time you can right click and that will pull up the guide properties. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to pull this guide off and let's talk about our job setup real quick. For this drawing, I'm simply just working with a single-sided job, and I'm working with just a 12 by 12 piece here. For me, as always, at the beginning of the classes when we talk about job setups, my particular setup is, I'm working off of my wasteboard, which is also a jig. So for me, my Z0 position is the bottom of my material. However, for your particular setup, you could set it at the top of the material, whatever, your setup requires and stuff. My XY datum position, because of the jig on that's, a part of that wasteboard, I work from, there's a little 90-degree kind of fence layout on the bottom left corner. So I work from the bottom left corner of my material. Whether you start from one of the corners of your material or from the center, it's based on your particular needs. So my setup is a 12 by 12 by 3/4 inch piece of material, working with the Z0 at the bottom, and my XY datum position is at the bottom left. All right. Now, we're going to click OK, and we're going to get back in here. And again, this is our end result. We're kind of going for this particular type design and everything. So let's get over here, and I'm going to turn that bitmap layer off and kind of get zoomed into the middle here. Now, what I like to do, because our vectors are scalable, once we get that general layout and things, we can scale this to any size that we want. And what I generally do, especially when it comes to the Maltese Cross, I have a particular layout that I use that helps me with my layout in my design, and that simply is a series of rectangles. So my first rectangle is going to be 7 inches by 7 inches. Okay, 7 by 7, and I want the center of it at my 6 inch on my X, 6 inch on my Y, which is the center of my material, because my material is 12 by 12. So my X, Y, 0 would be, or my center of my board would be 6 inches and 6 inches. So let's go ahead and create that guide, and let's turn off. Always work in the appropriate layer. I need to create a new layer because I've got some sample designs and things in the other layer. So we got layer 5 is going to be blank, and we'll go ahead and do that again now that I have the correct layer on. So let's go ahead and let's create that 7 by 7 rectangle on our board. There we go. Now, Jim, yes, I can. Jim is asking if I can show my jig. And I think I can. Let's take a detour for a quick second to show the jig. I think I have a picture of it. I think I can. I think I have a picture of it. Let's go. where would that be if I had a picture of my jig? I don't want to delay too much time, but where would that be if I had a picture of my jig? Oh, I know where it would be. Documents. Bear with me a second. I know exactly where it would be. Digital Carver User Group Assets. It would be Digital Wood Carver User Group PowerPoint. It's probably under miscellaneous assets. Let's see here. Equipment. Stand by. Yeah, let's go into that PowerPoint. And let's scroll down to well, hang tight for a second. Let's scroll down to okay, it's not in there. Hold tight for a second. One more place that I could look. Documents and Digital Wood Carver. Outline, and we'll look in this PowerPoint. Yes. Okay. So let's pop that up. And so this is my CNC table, my jig. Basically it's a cam clamping jig. I've got three fence blocks that I can position, and I've got them positioned in a 90-degree orientation. I've got 3 cams so that when I'm clamping my material, I can cam lock that material into place. So basically it's just an MDF wasteboard with holes that are 3/4 inches in diameter, 3/8 of an inch deep, set 2 inches apart on center. My cams themselves are cut out of just hardwood, in my case walnut, and on the bottom side they have pegs, almost like Lego block pegs, that were milled into them so they fit, and I can lock them and pop them in anywhere on the particular wasteboard. Okay, so that's what my particular jig looks like on my table that I use. Very simple, simplistic in design. My fences are adjustable depending on the length of my material, or what have you, and that's it. Okay, so hopefully that helped a little bit, Jim. All right, so now back to our design here. We've got our 7-inch by 7-inch rectangle here, and now I'm going to use a series of rectangles that, in my methodology, to help me lay out my guidelines and things. And so what I start out with is, the first thing I start out with is a 3/8 inch, 3/8, 0.375 by 0.375. And I'm going to create that rectangle down here in the corner. And I'm going to take that 3/8 inch rectangle and I'm going to snap it to the corner here. And then I'm going to double on my next rectangle that I make. I'm going to double the size. So my next rectangle is going to be 3/4. So if I come in here and create my 3/4 by 3/4 rectangle. So we'll get rid of that 3. So 0.75 by 0.75. I'm going to click that rectangle, and again also I'm going to snap that to the corner there. And then I'm going to double that size. I'm going to double that size and make it 1.5 inch rectangle. So we're going to take and we're going to go let's open up our rectangle tool, and I'm going to go 1.5 and 1.5. And once again, I'm going to take and snap the corner of that rectangle to the corner. So I've got this layout here. Now what this layout does is it's going to help me lay out my guidelines. And basically what I mean by that is now I can pull down a guideline and snap to here, pull down a guideline and snap to here. I can pull over a guideline and snap to that vertical line there on both of those locations. And then I'm going to have two 45-degree guidelines. So if I take this guideline and I go into the properties and I rotate it 45 degrees and click apply, I can take and grab and drag this guideline and snap to that corner of the smaller rectangle. And then I can create another parallel guide relative in the negative position 0.375, and actually it needs to go in the positive direction, not negative. We need to go to the right, not to the left. Sorry, I just sat there and told you that, and I did it again. And so let's get rid of this guide here. Okay, and we're going to snap this guideline to that bottom corner. And this is going to be the start of my layout. And you'll see how all this comes together in a moment. But let's turn those guides off for just a second. We'll turn the visibility off, and I'm going to show you how these 4 rectangles, my 7x7 and then my 3, help me lay out a Maltese cross. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all 3 of these lower rectangles here, and I'm going to go into my mirror tool under the transform objects menu. And I want to create a mirror copy, and I want to flip about the job center, and I'm going to flip horizontally, vertically, and horizontally. Okay, and that's going to give me my start of my layout for my Maltese cross. Okay, all right, so now let's get the guidelines back into play. Now there's going to be a lot of guidelines on the screen, so I will turn them on and off, so you can see what's going on. Hey, Dave Gatton, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dave Gatton from CNC with Dave Gatton is here. Thanks for joining us, buddy. But I'll turn the guidelines on and off because there's going to be guidelines crisscrossing everywhere here in just a moment, but you'll see how the guidelines are going to help in just a second here. So let's go ahead and let's get our guidelines turned back on, our visible guides turned back on here. And now let's go ahead and add in our additional guidelines. So I'm going to drag and snap to this here, and I'm going to drag and oops, wrong one. I'm going to drag and snap to here. So now I should have matching guidelines on both sides. And then I'm going to take a guideline and I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to rotate it 135 degrees and click apply. And I'm going to drag that guideline and snap to that inside or outside corner or top right corner, whatever you call it, on that smaller square. And same thing, I'm going to drag another guide, and I'll just right click, change that to 135 degrees, and apply that as well, and grab this one and snap to that lower side. So now we have almost like X marks the spot type of deal, and the center of these guides is the center of my Maltese cross and everything. Okay, alrighty. Now the from here, let's go ahead and start our layout. Now what I want you to look at, is the way the guides are. You see these almost like triangles here. So let's kind of look at what I'm looking at here. So follow my mouse. We have this guideline here and this diagonal guideline, and where they intersect right here, if we look at the way they intersect, they have, you know, that triangle. And we have 4 of them. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 and everything. Okay? And so now what we're going to do is we're going to draw our circle first. I'll do a circle first, and what this box here is, this box here, the 1.5 inch, these guides here and here, here and here. Let's get back. Let me get centered back on the page here. These 4 guides that are running on the edges of the most largest rectangle, that 1.5 inch, that is my circle diameter. So if I open up my circle tool, and I'm going to start from the middle of my board, and I'm going to drag a circle out, and I'm going to snap to that guideline, which should snap to this guideline on the edge and this one on the right. Now I don't have it. Let's put a guide up here just to be consistent. Let's close this tool and let's throw a guide up here so you can see. So the center circle here should align with all 4 guidelines of that inner rectangle that is made by the guides, but that is determined by that 1.5 inch square on the 4 corners. Okay. Now I'm going to draw another rectangle. We're going to open up a rectangle, and this is going to be for my shape. And for this one, I'm going to freehand draw. And let's get centered back up on the board here. And now my inner my 3/4 inch rectangles, I'm going to use the corner of those 3/4 inch rectangles, and I'm going to drag a rectangle to that there. Now let's change the colors of our shapes that we're drawing. Let's change our colors, and I'm going to move this and our circle. We're going to move this to a new layer. And I want this layer to be red so we can all see it and everything. So we can see those lines. So let's turn off our guides. Let's turn off the guidelines for a minute. And you can see what we have here is we have a circle, a 4-inch diameter circle. And then we have a rectangle, and the corners of that rectangle are snapping to those 3/4 inch squares that we started off with. So we have a 3/8 inch square. That helps us with our diagonals. Okay, that helps us with our diagonal lines. Our 3/4 inch square gives us the layout of our rectangle. And then our 1.5 inch square gives us the diameter, edge to edge, of our circle. Okay, so that's how I use these boxes here. You know, how I can it's the way my mind thinks, and everybody's mind thinks something differently and approaches something differently. But those different steps, taking that 3/8 of an inch box and doubling it to 3/4, and taking that 3/4 and doubling it to 1.5 inches, that gives me the perfect symmetry for a layout of this Maltese Cross, or a lot of different objects and all, but this is kind of how my mind approaches things. And now you're going to see how things come together when we take and use these boxes here along with our guidelines. So let's come in here now and let's turn our guides back on. Okay. And remember what I said about the triangle, from, our triangle that you can see here. Well, we're going to go ahead and use our polyline tool, and we're going to start right at the intersection, right here at that intersection where those two lines meet, two diagonal lines meet on the right side. And you can go left, right. I start on the right hand side. I don't know why, but so I'm going to snap there my polyline tool, and I'm going to draw down, and where I want to go to is the intersection, this point here, where these two guides, this guide here and my diagonal guide, meet. So I want to snap to that intersection there, and I'm going to continue on up to here, where the two guides meet again. I'm going to snap to there. And then, of course, I'm going to come back to where I started. Okay? And I can close that tool now. And once again, let's take, let's take that shape. Let's turn that guideline off. Let's take that shape and let's turn it red as well. Let's move it to that layer where the vector will be red, so you can see that triangular shape there. Okay. Now this shape is going to be rotated around 4 times. 4 times to create this Maltese cross. But before we do, we're going to create that nice curved shape. So let's turn on our bitmap image again. And before we do, imagine that this being that triangle here, you know, we're going to now create this curved shape before we rotate it around 4 times. So let's turn that back off and let's go back over here. And so now I don't necessarily need the guidelines anymore. What I do need, I don't need the guidelines anymore, but what I do need are the boxes, because they're going to help me. And more specifically, which box is going to help me is my 1.5 inch box. Because what I want to do on this triangle that I drew right at this intersection, I need to go into node editing and I need to insert a point. And I want to zoom in tight. You see how when I click there, it didn't quite snap to that intersection. I want to drag that point up. I want to make sure it lands right on that intersection of my 1.5 inch box and my vector that I have selected that's in node editing. And I want to do the same thing up here. I want to put my mouse pointer there and insert a point. And again, zoom in nice and tight and drag that point up so it gets on that intersection. Okay. Now I'm going to stay in node editing mode from this point on to help me with my general shape. So the first thing is between these two, let's get kind of centered, and I'm going to zoom in to just this section. There you go. Hopefully you all can see that on the screen, all 4 of those points. We have a center point here. Now there's no point there, but there is a center to the line. The between these 2 black nodes, we have a center point. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to right click, and I'm going to turn this straight line between these 2 nodes into an arc. Okay, and then I'm going to pull that arc and snap it to the outside of my 7 inch by 7 inch square. Okay, you can start to see the shape taking place, you know, if we look at it and everything. Now, if this red rectangle here, if that is throwing you off, we can go ahead and delete it for right now. I'll put it in there, but now you'll be able to see that shape a little bit more clear. And now what we want to do is I'm going to go back into node editing mode on this shape here. And now on this small area here between this node and my point of this shape, I'm going to turn this into a Bezier curve. And I'm going to use this upper anchor point, and I'm going to slightly curve that shape inward. Now, before I do that, let's back up a second here. I'm missing one thing, but though. My edges, I don't want it to be at a point here. I don't want it to be at a point. I want to put a radius on it. So let's go over to our fillet tool. And I'm going to put a 16th inch 0.0625. Oops, too many decimal points. 0.0625. I'm going to put a 16th inch radius right there. Kind of round that off. Let's do the same thing up here at the top. Round that off. All right. Now let's go back to where we were. And let's go back into node editing mode. And we if I were to turn this back into a line, we would have these 2 points here. And like I said, you know, before I went back and put the radiuses in, let's go in now and let's change this back to a Bezier curve. And this upper anchor here, I want to pull this so we have a nice subtle curve. And where I want to pull my anchor to is I want it to be almost perfectly diagonal to my line here, this red line. I want that anchor to be an extension, of that line. And if I need some help, I could pull a guideline in there and change my rotation of it. Let's pull it over here. I could go into the properties of that guideline and go 45 and click apply. And I could take that guideline, and it's not a 45-degree angle. So let's back it off a little bit. It's probably about a 35. Oops, we got to go the other direction there, Haas. 49. There we go. All right, 51. It's an arc, so it's going to be tough to get a guideline perfectly on it, but that's okay. Close enough. All right, so when I'm in node editing mode on this, if I need, I now have a guide that I can pull that anchor to, and I want that anchor to be perfectly in line with that line. If that guideline helps you, that's great, but that's where we want it. Okay. So I'm going to delete this guide because I don't need it. I don't need it there. So now that I have that shape, you can start to see we're starting to get a little bit more of that shape, but we've got to make one more change here. But let's go up, and we're going to kind of keep things symmetrical. So let's do everything at the same time. Let's go back into node editing. I'm just doing one end and then the other. We're going to go and change that to a Bezier curve, and this anchor, we're literally just going to pull straight out until it's in line with that line there to create that shape. Okay. Now, here's the cool thing. If you want them to be perfectly aligned, we can use our tools with it. If I click on this anchor here, since I did the bottom first, I'll click on the top up here, and it'll turn red. And if I move down, and let's zoom out so you can see this, but if I move down and I hold down my shift key and click on this anchor point, I can hit the letter X left and right. I can hit the letter X on my keyboard to pull those two into perfect alignment. And they were already in alignment, so there was no movement. You're going to see that here in just a minute when I do it again here in just a second. But if you need to make sure that they're perfectly aligned, you can do that. Now, back into node editing, now we have our arc. We have our arc here. And on this arc, I want to change it from an arc to a Bezier curve. Okay? And that's going to give me this anchor point that's going to be snapped and locked in to the lower node down here. And I'm going to take that anchor and I'm going to move it across and down. I'm going to move it across and down, and I'm going to align it straight. I'm going to align it straight with this guideline here. I'm going to align it straight with that guideline. Now, I need to get my center point back in there, and I need to pull that center point back up here, get it back into place. Okay? And that will allow me to adjust my curve however much I want. And now, same thing with this anchor point over here. I'm going to pull it into alignment, to create that shape. And if we turn off the guidelines for a second, you can see the shape that we're creating. Okay. All right, let's turn our guides back on, and let's talk about that anchor point. Let's go back into node editing here, and let's talk about our anchor points. If I, you know, let's say I didn't have a guide to snap to here for that anchor point, you know, I could, you know, if I had it out here, I could select that first, hold down my shift key and select this one down here and hit the letter X on my keyboard. Oops. Always select the one you're aligning to first. Hold on a second, like a goofball. Let's undo that. Select this one here first, and then this one, and then hit the letter X on the keyboard. And I could pull that in, those two into alignment if I need to help me, you know, with my shape. Now on this one, I want these arcs to be the same. I don't want them, you know, adjusting like this. So on this midpoint, I am going to take and pull this and align it straight up with my rectangle out here. Okay, I don't want it crooked, you know, like this or anything. I need it aligned straight. Okay. Now let's get our guides turned off. The guidelines pretty much have served their purpose, and so have our boxes and everything. We can go ahead and with our boxes, we can go in and delete them. You know, and all. And now we have our wing, let's call it, to our shape. And now we can go into our circular copy. And if you were with me last week, we talked about the array tools. And we're going to be using the circular array tool. And with the circular array tool, I want my pivot point to be the center of my board. And if you double click on the little dot over here in this diagram, it will put the rotation center at the center of your material. Okay. And I want 4 copies of this, all right, of this particular shape, and I want to go around 360 degrees. Okay, so you can start to see the shape taking place, right? Now I'm going to undo that. I'm going to undo that because I always say, why draw what you can copy and why take multiple steps if you have to and all. I know that I'm going to have an outline around this particular shape. So let's go ahead and I want to do my offset now. So I'm going to take this shape and I'm going to go into my offset tool and I'm going to offset it outward 1/4 of an inch. Offset outward 1/4 of an inch. And I want to create sharp corners if there are any, especially, you know, on my points here and things. But I want to go ahead and offset that outward to create that double outline. And now I can take both of those shapes and I can use my circular array tool. Once again, I'm still revolving around the center of my material, which is 6 inches and 6 inches in my case, because I'm working on a 12-inch by 12-inch board. And I'm still going around 4 times. And now you can start to see that Maltese Cross, you know, taking some shape. Now I'd like a little bit more gap between those parts, so I want to undo that one more time. I'm also going to undo that offset, and I'm going to, instead of going 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to go 1/8 of an inch. Let's add a 1 in there, 0.125, and there we go. And let's rotate those parts around off of the center of our material. There we go. I want that gap in between the 4 parts. Okay. Now at this point, my outer rectangle has pretty much served its purpose as well. You know, I would normally have that on another layer, so that layer could be turned off and no longer visible. So I have my general shape here. But if you like to have it on, you know, just for whatever purposes, and in my case, my purpose is these 4 guys right here, they need to be put on the they need to be moved over to layer 6. So that way when I do turn off that rectangle, my general shape is here. Okay, so I didn't have the correct layer chosen, layer 6, when I did that offset and everything. All right, now we can start to kind of finish up our shape. And so first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our circle here and we're going to offset it inward a certain distance. So our circle, let's go ahead and offset it inward. And in this case, I will go 1/4 of an inch. And I don't need sharp corners and all. And let's go ahead and offset that inward. Okay. All right, you can see where things are starting to come together, right? You know, from this shape, you know, to help us. And it's perfectly symmetrical. You know, everything is just perfectly, you know, our nodes are aligned. Everything, you know, is identical. It would be, you know, just ideal. All right, so let's now kind of create something. So our outline here, these particular triangles and everything, they're going to end up being trimmed. They're going to end up being trimmed to our outside line here. But I want to use this outside line first to help me create my individual wings. We don't need these triangular parts in here anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all 4 of my inner triangles. Well, I'll still call them triangles even though they're not straight lines on the other end now. But those guys right there, I'm going to select all of them first, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to grab my outer ring here, select it last, and do I want to do my outside ring or my inside ring? Give me a second. Let me look at something and let me see. Yeah, I want my outside ring. Just wanted to make sure that I didn't want to change anything up. So with that outside ring selected last, that last object is now the boundary. The last object we selected is now the boundary. And so I'm going to take and subtract. I'm going to use my trim tool, and I'm going to clear everything inside of that boundary away. Now, why the trim tool is good for this is because not only when does it clear that inside and everything, but it closes off these vectors. If I were to delete that circle for a second, you would see that these vectors are still closed. You know, it created that shape, you know, of around that circle and everything, you know. And so that's why this trim tool is perfect for this, to close off that vector and create that shape. So let's undo that delete. I want to keep my circle there. And the reason why I want to keep my circle there, now that I have my shapes selected, now I can come in and focus on the outside boundaries, right? I'm not going to come in and do the same thing where I subtract, you know, or trim to the boundary and all. I'm going to use my interactive trim tool to help me with my trim. And so we're going to, let's start with this side first so you can kind of see what's going on. And I'm going to come in here with my scissor tool. And with my scissor tool, I'm going to click this line right here away and this line. Down below between my 2 circles, I'm going to trim those 2 lines. Okay. We're going to do the same thing over here. Outside, outside, and then the 2 lines. Same thing down here. Outside, outside, and these 2 lines. And lastly, same thing here. Okay. Now I have 4 open vectors I got to contend with, so I'm just going to select this open vector, the circle 1, and I'm hitting the delete key on my keyboard. I'm just selecting them and hitting delete and everything. That was the remaining part of those circles that got trimmed away. And now I should have an outside boundary for my Maltese cross. And then I have my inside vectors. And then what that means is these vectors here can be deleted and we end up with our shape. Okay. All right. Miter Mike, hearing my voice is like hearing deja vu. Is that because you're hearing an echo for some reason or something else? Or it's just it's so monotone it's putting you to sleep? Let me know. Or is it from when we worked together yesterday? Let me know. But all in all, right, we have our shape. Now, I've got some DXF vectors that I, have, for things like this when I'm making a Maltese cross. I've got a hook and ladder. I've got kind of a center symbol that would go into the middle of this, and I've got a fire hydrant. All right, and so I can now take my Maltese cross and I can now scale it up to whatever size I would like it to be, because it is scalable. Right. Right. I heard it for 5 hours last night. Sorry, I'm a talker. And if I now we'd have our text and everything in here. But what I would like to do is I would like to create a little bit of a guide where things will snap to. So I'm going to take my most inner circle here, and my center point, if I were to take, and my guide's all turned back on, but if I were to take and snap to a center line, my center line of this particular part here isn't where it needs to be. I need to be more so up along this thing. So the guideline's not going to help me in that case. So what I'm going to have to do is when I put my parts in, I'm just going to have to center them up the best possible visibly and everything. But what I do want to do is I want to take this circle and I want to offset it. And let's measure first. I'm going to take and do a vertical measurement. And from the edge of this circle, I want to come to, see, center looks pretty good. That looks good. And so that distance is going to be 1.22 inches. Okay. Now, when I'm offsetting, if I were to offset this circle 1.22 inches, if I were to offset this inner circle 1.22 inches, that would be too far, right? So if I go 1.22 and I offset it, no, it's not too far. I'm sorry. I was thinking half if it was a radius. It's going to offset the full diameter. So good. 1.22 inches. All right. Offset that. And let's get rid of that measurement. And then I'm going to take my scissors and just quickly go in, and I'm literally going to trim all of these lines, leaving these center lines in each of those wings. Now they're open vectors. I'm only using them for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to snap my words and things to, or also create my curve of letters. So what I mean by that is, let's say I had in this instance the word fire. Let's go with I'm going to go with a Tahoma font, and let's say I go fire, and I'm going to go Tahoma bold, and let's go about 1 inch tall. I can take that fire, and the first thing I want to do is I want to spread out or do some spacing. So I'm going to open up my spacing tool, hold down my shift key so I can spread these items apart a little bit so I don't have any overlaps going on here. Get a nice even spacing. And then I can take that word and I can hold down my shift key and grab this. Oops, let's get out of the text tool first. Take that word, grab my shift key, and grab that anchor there, and I can use my wrap text along curve. And I want to be on the curve. I want to be in the middle of the curve. I want to align to the curve, and I want to be on the other side of the curve. There we go. And my text spacing, I can spread that out, to follow that curve. And that looks good there. And so now that curve has served its purpose. Again, could be moved to another layer for like layout or whatever, or it could be deleted, whatever the case may be. And then in the case of the bottom, let's go fighters. And it might not be fighters. It could be a department number. It could be a county. It could be, you know, every Maltese Cross is unique in different ways depending on the fire department and things like that. And so let's take this, let's move it up here so you guys can see. Let's go ahead and do some spacing on our letters. Hold the shift key down so we're pushing them apart. Let's get some general spacing. Go. And once again, I can select that with that to get out of my text tool, hit the escape key, or go over and select your regular selection mode. With that, with fire selected, I can now come down and select my bottom line. Again, wrap to curve. It's going to say it's too long to fit the curve, which I'm aware of. So it's going to automatically scale it. And so I want to be on the curve. I want to be in the middle, and I want to align to the curve. And then I'm going to adjust my scaling appropriately. And my spacing appropriately. Oop. And all. And there we go. Now, of course, if I want to be bigger or lower and everything, I could come in and, you know, I could bump this down, and I could hold down my shift key, grab this corner, and I could size it up a little bit bigger and things in there. Whatever the case may be, you know, you lay out however you would lay out your, you know, your particular design. Now with that done, I can come in and grab this guy, and I'm going to group him together. Let's group all of these together. I'm going to select all three of these and group, hook and ladder, group. Let's start with the hydrant, and I'm going to grab this middle point here. And I'm actually not going to snap to that center line. I don't believe that would look good, snap to the center. Let me see here. Let me get centered there. Actually, that's not too bad. That'll work. Let's grab our hook and ladder. And let's snap to there. And then let's grab our center emblem and let's snap it to there, right? And of course our two, now that we've snapped everything into place or what have you, we've ended up with our design. And so that in itself for me is how I approach things. And real quick, let's see here. Let's ask a question and all. Can you center your lettering on that curve? Yes, you can. Yes, when you're in the curve tool, you're going to choose middle, which will center the text on that curve. Middle, and then you want to be on the curve, so meaning you're starting in the center. Yep. Miter Mike says, did you trace the hook and ladder, or are there a place you could download? Basically, the fire hydrant, the hook and ladder, and then of course, you know, your hook and ladder, your hoses and things, and your hat and all of that can be traced from, you know, basically you can Google those objects. You know, you can Google search for a fire hydrant vector, hook and ladder vector, firefighter symbol vector, you know, things like that, and you can trace them. I need to size this down a little bit. But and once an image is traced and all, I keep those in a DXF file. I keep all my image traces in a DXF, so I never have to trace them again. I can pull them into different designs and stuff, you know. All right, so now, you know, If I were doing this as, a regular type carving and all, it would be pocket cuts, with some V carving and everything. And for me, I would have a profile cut on my outside profile, of course. I'd have a pocket cut kind of recessing these insides in a little bit. So let's do that. Let's start with our profile. I'll just, normally you end with the profile, but I'll start with the profile. Let's go 0.75 1/4 inch end mill on the outside of the line. I'm not going to do any tabs or anything. I'm just going to create that toolpath for that profile cut. Okay, so that'll give us our profile cut for our Maltese Cross and everything. And of course, I got to turn my steps up. I was doing a carving the other day that required some small steps, so didn't need to be done in 12 passes. But that's all right. We'll let it finish up. Okay, so that would be my profile. That would be the last item that I would run, of course, on the CNC, right? My pocket cuts. Now, the ones with my text and objects and things, out here, if I want that text to be raised, so I have a choice. Am I going to pocket this out, and am I going to V-carve this stuff down to the bottom of that shallow pocket? An example would be, am I going to take these 4 objects here, and am I going to do a shallow pocket? And in my case, let's go 1/8 of an inch. And let's 1/4 inch end mill's fine, and let's calculate that. And let's preview that toolpath. Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate that. Kudos. All right, so you can see kind of where we're heading here on our shape. Okay, let's put our pocket top of the list there. If I come in here and now I wanted to V-carve this stuff, I could now select everything, turn off the outside shapes there. All I want is my objects selected, and I could go in and do a V-carve toolpath. No flat depth, just let it go out, but I need to start at 1/8 of an inch because that's how deep my pockets are, and calculate that toolpath. And oops, I got one more pocket to do. Sorry. Let me add this, go into this pocket toolpath and add this circle in there. That should be pocketed out 1/8 of an inch deep as well. Let's preview that, get that center pocket in there first. Forgot my center pocket. All right, and now let's take a look at that V-carve that is, it's already going to be carving down 1/8 of an inch deep. I don't have any flat depth or anything in there. I'm just letting it carve to whatever depth it would normally carve to and all. And, I could very easily just create a nice, simple V-carve sign that looks like that. Nothing wrong with it at all, It, looks good for what it is in its simplicity. I could add some color to it. Let's say that my Maltese Cross, let's say I painted that a solid color. And let's go with fire engine red there. And let's say on our carved areas, we'll go yellow, and then on our V-carve, let's go with let's get our V-carve black, and let's get our inside pockets. Let's go with, I don't know, a gold. Oops, not my profile. My pocket needs to be gold, not my profile. Whatever the case may be, just that, what I mean. But what I would like to do with this is, let's look at it the other way. Let's look at if we were doing raised objects, raised shapes and everything. and all, instead of pocketing out and doing a simple V-carve. So let's turn off our material colors and let's reset our preview. Let's go back to, I'll just go back to kind of a maple looking piece here. And let's take and select our design, everything except for the outer perimeter. And let's do a V-carve toolpath. I'm going to do a flat depth of 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to use a 60-degree V-bit, but I'm going to use a flat area clearance tool. And I want a flat area clearance tool that can get a majority of this area. So I'll most likely be using an 1/8 inch end mill, or even possibly, depending on the size of this, a 16th inch end mill. In my case, I believe an 1/8 inch end mill will do just fine. So that'll be all the flat area clearance tool and everything. And so I could calculate this, and let's get our profile into the mix, and let's preview these visible tool paths. So we're going to have our pocket that's going to pocket out around these. White, Todd throws in there. White, not gold. Thanks, Todd. I appreciate that. Get that final profile cut in there. And let me stop that right there so we don't have to see this thing go around 12 times. Let me change my cut depth here. All right. Now let's preview that out, finish that up. So we could do that kind of raised effect from this and everything. Now, I'm in Aspire. And the purpose for me being in Aspire is I want to model this part. Let's say I want to model this part and things. But this, you know, we've got a nice, so that's another variation where we have kind of a V-carve of this. And once again, as Todd threw in there, you know, if I came in here, now the difference with this is my pocket cut. My pocket cut, that would be a white, as Todd pointed out. And on the V-carve, if I wanted to, I could outline, you know, it. But see what happens when I do this with the V-carve pocket. I can't really simulate it very well because it, you know, both of them are kind of in the same tool path. But you get the general idea. You know, if you wanted to add some color or whatever to it, you know, where you can go from there. Let's go back to a maple. And let's turn and go back to our natural wood color here. All right. So that's alternative number 2, you know, from this simple design. And now let's come in and let's look at modeling this. I am in Aspire. Now this from this point on, this particular small section of the tutorial will be basically Aspire based, because you're unable to do modeling in V-carve Desktop and V-carve Pro. So bear with me for those of you that have Desktop and Pro. Stay with me. We're only gonna it only takes just a few moments, but while we have the shape and the vectors here, I want to show that also. So I'm going to go into the modeling tools, and we always start with a foundation. Now, with our foundation, this is for me always generally it's a flat design. So I'm going to go into the Create Shape tool in our modeling tools, that first icon in the top row, and it's going to be a flat shape. It's just a foundation. Okay. And with that flat shape, it's just building up kind of a little bit of a base. And I'm going to go with a small buildup. You know, I'm going to go with a small buildup on it. And so I'll probably go maybe 1/4 of an inch. And let's split the view. And let's reset this back to a blank board and close that so you can see the shapes that's about to be created. But we're going to go with 1/4 inch flat shape. We're going to add, and I'll just call this the base. And let's go ahead and click apply to build that up. Now, the one thing that I would like in my case is, you know, I would like to possibly have a round over on the edge here. And if I do, how I round over my edge is going to be determined by this next shape that I'm about to build. Okay, so now I'm going to take my outside perimeter and I'm going to select along with, first of all, let me unselect that. Always click on Start New Component after you create your first component. Okay. And now that I have that, now let's grab our outer perimeter. Again, I'm going to grab the inside. Oops, not my model. Grab my inside vectors. Here. And the inside vectors of the shapes, not the decals or the logos or anything. And on these guys here, it's going to be a curved profile. And I'm probably going to go with a subtle curve. We'll look and see how it looks here in a moment. But I'm going to build that up. And overall, I don't want this shape to be any more than 3/4 of an inch. So I'll go ahead and let's go 1/4 of an inch, and let's click apply. Okay. Now looking at my 60-degree angle at some of my intersections and things and stuff, I may get some of these bubbles and lines that I could smooth out and stuff. Depending. If I wanted to, I could shorten up the wing, line across here to give myself a little bit more room and all. But let's change that angle. Instead of 60, I'm going to go with a subtle 30 and click apply. Oh, no, too subtle. Let's go 45. There we go. 45 was the winner. Okay. Now, now that I have that, basically, what I've ended up with now is a 1/4 inch pocket in here and things, and I want to fill those pockets in a little bit. I only really want, for me, 1/4 inch might be enough. I might not want to go any less than that because my fire hydrant, my text and all, they're going to be model shapes also, and stuff. But I might not want it to be that deep. Who knows? Let's find out. Let's see what it looks like when it's all together and stuff. Let's go ahead and let's create a new component. All right, now for the new component, I'm going to select my text. And I'm going to do the text separate from the 3 icons, or the 3 symbols and all, because I want my text to have a little bit of a curved top to it. Not much. 45 probably going to be a little bit much. I'm going to back that down to 35 degrees, and I want the height of that probably to be about 1/4, and my base height, there we go, because what I want to end up happening is if I go and look at this down the y-axis and I tilt this ever so slightly, I just want my letters ever so slightly to be above the outer lip. I just want them just protruding ever so much above the upper lip and all. Okay. All right, and now from there, start a new component. Now we'll put this as the text, we'll click apply on that, and start a new component. And now my symbols, all three of the symbols basically are going to take, as far as the shape, the general shape, they're going to take on the general shape. Now on this one, I don't want them too puffy, you know, and things like that. So I would probably, for me, it would probably be about 25 or 35 on the that curved profile, you know, at the top. It could even be a flat profile. A little bit of curvature, like a little softness and everything. So I'll leave it with the curved profile, but it's going to be a low profile, about 25-degree angle. I'm still going to keep my 1/4 inch base height. I may change that to an 1/8 of an inch base height, depending on the look. And we'll see here in just a second. So let's go ahead and add that in. And got our shapes. Now, if I, on my shape here, especially in the center shape here, if I want to fill in a little bit, if I don't want those caverns a 1/4 of an inch deep, you see how they're a 1/4 of an inch deep? And that might also apply for the fire hydrant, even the hook and ladder. If I want just a little bit of meat in there, you know, not so deep, I want them to 1/4 inch tall, but I may not want these pockets that deep, then I can now come in and start a new component, and I'll call this symbols 1. So bear with me, symbols 1. And then let's start another component. And for this component, I'm going to take my objects here, and I'm going to ungroup them. Okay, and actually that was stupid. I didn't need to ungroup them. Yeah, I did. I know on the fire hydrant I did. Let's see here. Let's start with this guy first. Did they not? Did I? Let's do that again. My shapes went away on the other side. Hold on. Control Z. Control Z. Let's close this tool. Get back to my groups. There we go. For some reason, my shapes didn't stick. So let's go back into that Create Shape tool. And 25, no limit. Click Apply. Let me get those back in there. Hey, Tim. Thanks, Ronnie. All right, let's symbols 1. All right, start a new component. That should leave them in there this time. There we go. All right, now I should be able to merge with them still selected, and with starting a new component. I should be able to just let me think how I want to do this. I know I need the outside profile of that one. I know I'm going to need the outside profile of that one. Yeah, let's do what I was originally going to do. And what I originally want to do is ungroup each of these objects. And what my goal is I'm going to literally offset outward a super small amount, maybe 0.010 of an inch. I'm going to create sharp corners where there's sharp corners. Okay, just to create that outer profile. you know, and things in there. And nope. Don't need to, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, guys and girls. I'm thinking not rudimentarily here. I need to select my inner vectors. That one, that one, that one. Oh, not the model. Come on. Okay. And what I'm trying to do is fill in those center pockets a bit. So go back to my shape tool under modeling. And this is going to be a flat shape. It's going to be a flat shape. And it's going to be merged. It's going to be merged with the other model that's below it. So I need to make sure that my shape height has enough base height that it's going to make a difference. You see how it filled in there, you know, a little bit. So if I, you know, because I'm merging, it's merging from, you know, base up, and it's not deep enough, right? So I need to, you know, come up here and merge. Now I'm at 3/8 of an inch. That leaves me about 1/8 of an inch pocket in there and everything, and that's what I want. If I were to go 1/2 inch, right, just so you can kind of see what's happening here with it being merged. If I were to go 1/2 inch, then click apply. You know, I'm filling in the ladder, right? I don't want to do that. I want a nice little shallow 1/8 of an inch pocket there. So it's going to be basically 0.375. Click apply, and that's where I want to be. All right. So, oh, dang it. All right. So on that one's done. Let's go over here to the hydrant. I'll do the middle one last. The hydrant, just on the inside of my, you know, fins here. So these guys here, I want to do the same thing. Click apply, and it's going to be a merge, not an add, merge. See what happens when you add it, puffed it all the way up. And all I'm doing is I'm just filling in that meat a little bit, you know, enough. Now, don't worry about these straight walls. We're about to add a draft. I'm going to talk to you guys about adding drafts to your models here in just a second. So with that, we can start a new component. Okay, and now let's focus on our middle, our center in here. And so all of these deep pocket areas, like the you know, the rungs of the ladder, the holes in between the ladders, you know, the outside of my helmet, things like that. Those are the areas that I want to basically, you know, make sure that I select and stuff. And so let's select the entire thing. Okay. And I'm going to deselect this outside border that goes all the way around, and that should leave me with my inside vectors that I need selected. And oops, except for I don't need this ball selected out there. There you go. And once again, all I'm doing is merging and building up a little bit of that meat, in there. And again, if I wanted to go, you know, higher, let's say I wanted to go 0.425, click apply. That's going to fill in those inner areas even more, you know, type of thing. All right. Okay. So I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to close this tool, and let's focus now strictly on the model here. All of our walls of our letters, of our ladder, of our everything, symbols, they're all vertical, even our outsides here and stuff. That is what I want to add a draft to. So what I want to do is I want to select my components, and first things first, I always make a copy and I work off the copy of the original. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of group these guys together, and then I'm going to duplicate, right click and duplicate that group. Okay. On my component tree here, level 1, on my component tree, I'm going to right click and insert a new level, and I'm going to take that group copy that I made and drag it up to that level. And now I can turn off the visibility of level 1, and that's my masters, right? That's my masters. If I ever have to go back and change anything, adjust anything, do whatever I have my originals to always revert back to. Because when I work with these guys here in level 2, if I were to, let's go ahead and ungroup them for right now. In my components in level 2, if I were to work with them to create this draft and all, it's going to require that I bake these components together. It's going to require I bake these components together and stuff. So let's go ahead and select my components. And I don't need that first component selected. Let's turn off that first component. Symbols. Yeah, we'll select them all. My text, my component here, and as far as the base, yeah, let's go ahead and do the base too. All right, with those, all of them, let's do it all. And we'll see how the base turns out. I might not want to draft on the base, but in Aspire, we have the ability to create a draft. So think about if you were doing injection molding. You've got these two parts that come together, and this liquid, hot plastic liquid gets injected in there and everything. If there was not a slight draft within those molds and everything, when those molds come apart and all those pieces, that they would be brittle in certain areas. The draft gives us a little bit of an angle for releasing those molds and all that stuff. Well, in our case, for us, so when we're working with our tapered ball nose bits and things like that, giving our things a little bit of a draft gives us a little bit of base meat, right? A little bit of base meat. So you'll see. So take a close look and get a kind of a look at how everything is with our straight angles and all that stuff. And let's go into our draft here. And I don't know how this is going to be a test right now to see how well the computer handles modeling and if I'm getting any fluctuation and stuff. We're going to see if the computer, if I get any buffering for you guys. But someone just reminded me, now this file is saved as Maltese Cross, but I am going to come back and hit save again just to save my updates and changes, as William threw out there, hey, save your work. So let it go through and do that. That way it saves our changes up to this point. All right, now on my draft, how subtle you want your draft to be is up to you. I generally work with a 30-degree draft. And basically, if you can barely see that little diagram on those vertical parts, it's just going to create that angled cut and everything, or angled model. It's going to build up that component at an angle, a 30-degree angle. So let's see how that looks. Let's go ahead and click apply and let it go through and build this these components up and add this draft to the model and see what the change looks like. So as it's doing it, keep a visual of those vertical walls on all the components, the text, the outside, the inside, all the symbols and everything. And when it's finished calculating, you'll see how the draft, is created. Now, right now with this draft, we have two models on top of each other, so it's a little puffy looking and stuff and everything. If I close this, you'll notice that when that draft was created, it created the actual model with the 30% draft, which means that I could turn off the other components and get this model looking like it should. And we may go back and I may reduce that down, that draft. I may reduce it down to a 20-degree angle. A couple of my edges, like on my fire hydrant and stuff, are running in to one another and all. And so, 30 degrees might be a little much, but you see how it creates those nice angles and all and everything. I think I am. Let's undo that. Let's undo the draft. And let's go back, and I'm just going to do a subtle one. Maybe cut it in half, like 15 degrees. So let's turn our model back on. All of our symbols, everything turned back on. There we go. Oh, one more. All right, with everything selected, the base 2 is fine. Let's go with, I'm going to cut it in half, and I'm just going to do a slight 15-degree draft. No, no, Mike, Mike, no. Aspire does none of the Vectric software auto saves. There we go. All right, and so we can go ahead and close that. And once again, we can turn off our other components because it recreated the model with the draft. So we do not need these other components visible. We actually don't even need them. I could go through and do them because remember, I have my originals, right? So I could go through and just delete them out. I tend to not for some reason. I don't know why. But I've got my originals here. So, for simplicity, I could come in and select these components and I could delete them out of there. Right? Keep things nice, clean, simple. All that stuff because I always have my originals to go back to and everything. But now we end up with our design, and you might not like that deep of a pocket, 1/4 inch, raised up. The reason why I raise it up like that at 1/4 of an inch because we're not quite 100% done yet. We're gonna last step we're gonna do is we're gonna go through and see if we need to add any smoothing, apply any smoothing to this part for its final finish. So I'm going to take and select my model here, and I'm going to apply a smoothing filter to it, and that's it. That'll finish this model up. But we started this project with a few simple squares, right? A few simple squares and guidelines, and let's add a little bit of smoothing. That's probably about as good as I'll go with that. Click OK. And now we have a finished Maltese Cross model. Or we have the vectors for a Maltese Cross for V-carving it and pocking it and cutting it out, and things like that. And like I said, all of this started with bear with me a second before I finish that sentence. New layer. Turn that visibility off for a second to hide those. Let's take the text, move that to a new layer. Turn the visibility off on that, and then come over here and turn the visibility off on our model so we can see where we're at. But it's hard to believe that with our shape and everything that we started out with just a few simple squares to help us. And again, guys, if you ever want to kind of duplicate this, 3/8 of an inch, double it. That makes a 3/4 inch. Double it. That makes our 1.5 inch. And then from there, your guidelines basically align to those two sides of each of the square, except for the lower square. your diagonal guidelines snap to the two sides of it. And that will give you that triangular shape there, your points. It'll give you the positioning of where your curve needs to be and your arcs and things. It'll give you the guideline for where your nodes need to get pulled to. And all of that, all of that, we end up with our finished piece. Right? Right. And it's a scalable design. It's a scalable design, meaning that, once you have the vectors, you could export those vectors, file, export as a DXF. You never have to draw it again, right? And you could, we could have very easily imported a picture to trace it, but we all know from tracing pictures of past and everything that a lot of times we don't get good tracings or good results. 90% of the time we do, right? Vectric's default tracing and everything works perfectly and all. But we want to look at this approach of creating something from scratch, right? Not using another picture or whatever. If I wanted to make this and I wanted to make this from scratch, how would I approach it? In my mind, when I look at any particular object, excluding the circle, right? But when I look at any particular object, let me wake this up here real quick. Come on now, wake up, wake up. It all starts with a square. You know what I mean? When you're drawing profiles for router bits, you draw your profile for a router bit, and if I was doing a 1/4 inch radius router bit, it wouldn't be 8 inches by 8 inches. It'd be probably about 1/2 inch wide and 1/2 inch tall, 1/4 inch radius. That gives me this shape here. In node editing, I can go into node editing, and I can cut the vector on this corner here. I can cut the vector down here at the bottom, from that rectangle that I started off with. I can delete this side here, and with my polyline tool I can draw however long my vector needs to be there. I can draw however long my vector needs to be there, and with that profile I could add that to my tool database, or I could come in and flip it to the left to create that router bit. You know what I mean? So I approach things, any object that I come across, I step back and I literally break it down into shapes. I look for those circles, ellipses, rectangles, and things for those shapes and stuff. We did a little bit of that. When we were working with our offset tools and everything last week, and from those general shapes and things, let's center them up. Let's take this guy, hold down the shift key, and let's make him a little bit wider. And we take those two parts and weld them together to create that shape, offset it inward 1/8 of an inch, sharp corners, and here let's go outward, offset outward, sharp corners, 1/8 of an inch, and then I could create that multiple array where these parts get them lined up here. Oop, this one too, this one and this one. Hold the control key down there, Laney. You know, to start building those arrays to create those unique patterns and things, but with me, everything starts with a simple square. And for the case of the Maltese Cross, if we were to size all of this down to, let's size this down back to 7 inches by 7 inches, and you can do the math on what it would be any other way, but if we look at our shapes and things, our intersections, our guidelines and all that, it all starts with a square. Now this circle here, or this rectangle, represents the guide for the diameter of the circle, the outer circle, all of that stuff, and your smaller rectangle represents the angled lines to your smaller I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do that. I actually wanted to do this. Turn that off for a second. Turn that on. I'll get it here in a second, guys. Hold on a second. Your smaller square represents that angled lines, and those angled lines, the intersections and everything, represent that triangle that gets rotated around 4 times. You know, your intersections where your guidelines meet and your box meets, you know, here, that represents where you put your nodes for the curve, you know, on those triangles to get that nice shape. And so for me, that's how my mind works. Everybody's mind works different, how you approach something. I'm hoping, and this method, guys, by the way, 3/8, double to 3/4 to 1 inch, you know, with a 7-inch square, just a starting point. Because remember, it's scalable after that. If you ever have to draw a Maltese Cross or, you know, general shapes and all, that would be your starting point. If you ever wanted to write that stuff down, you know, if you ever wanted to try this, write that down, because it's the same every time. Now, of course, once you create one, you don't need to do it again, right? You can save it as a DXF, but, you know, if you ever, you know, wanted to give it a go, it's a good way to go. But, you know, from there, you know, there's lots of different approaches and all, but use your guidelines. Use your guidelines. Help you work with guidelines to help you effectively lay things out. You also have a grid that you can snap to and work with if you ever wanted to. Me, I don't work with the grid. My guidelines are all I need when creating different parts and stuff and everything to ultimately end up with let me see what I got going on here. You know, to ultimately end up with your shape or whatever it may be. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And again, that inside square, not this circle here, but this inside circle, that's what that big square represents, the diameter of the inside circle. And then it's a 1/4 inch offset outward to the other circle where you create your shape. Anyway, I don't need to harp on that. I'm going to stop here. I'm hoping that, you know, when all said and done, whether you do a V-carve of the project, whether you, you know, if you have a spire and you try to create a model of it, whatever the case may be, I hope you give it a try. I hope you give it a try and see if that works for you. And anything, badges, sheriff's badges, you know, firefighter, if you do things for, like, you know, for heroes and stuff, you know, you're making plaques and stuff, or whatever the case may be, just look at the design, step back, look at it, and break it down into simple shapes: squares, circles, ellipses, triangles, and see which of those shapes help you create that project best. And then, of course, from your hard lines, squares, circles, rectangles, you start adding in those smooth, subtle curves and radiuses and things like that, and it starts to come together. So I hope this this class, it was a short class. We're actually gonna end up with some questions and stuff, but that's pretty much it. Yeah, there you go. Badges. We don't need no stinking badges. But any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah, no problem, Michael. No problem at all, Michael Holhauser. Sorry. William, let's see here. Explanation of the design, and particularly the modeling portion you demonstrated. Thanks. You're welcome, William. Hopefully that little bit of modeling is a little simple little tutorial on modeling and stuff. Start from the foundation up, and if you have a spire, get into modeling, play around with it, in creating your shapes and stuff. Cecil, the first part of the class really explains how these rectangles and everything came into play to help us lay out our guidelines and all. Definitely go back and take a look at that if you missed the first part, for sure. And Steve and Mary Quinn, definitely catch the recorded version if you're still with us. Definitely catch the recorded version for the first part. Again, that talks about guidelines and then how we use this simple rectangle technique to lay out our guidelines to help us ultimately end up with this popular design here. Okay. Any questions on anything Vectric related, guys, that I might be able to take a few moments and answer for you? If not, then we will call it an early night. And I hope you get something out of this, whether it's how to work with guidelines or how to even open up the properties to the guidelines or just how to approach things in a different way. And for me, everybody, like I said, mind works different. My mind works in shapes. I literally take a look at something, and if I sit down and stare at it long enough, it starts to reveal itself. And then from there, I can draw those shapes out. And then once they're laid out, I can start to manipulate those shapes into that finished piece. And that's for me is the easiest approach. And if I can't do it, then I trace it, right? Then we find it and trace it. But I promised someone I would talk about how to make a Maltese cross. This is my approach. Hopefully you get something out of it. Any questions? Now's the time. Now's the time, ladies and gentlemen. If you got questions about anything, ask now, or we will say goodnight, and I'll give it just a few minutes because I know the stream is delayed a little bit behind me talking. All right. Yep, Rochelle. Rochelle, that's a great comment. An artist views objects as shapes, especially an artist, any portraits that they do, they generally start out with a combination of shapes and everything, especially like with the facial layout, and the T structures and stuff, or if they were drawing, apples and oranges or a fruit bowl. Absolutely. It's the same type of approach. Same type of approach with design. Well, for me it is anyway. Michael asks, would the toolpaths change between the first design and the model design? Yes, sir, Michael. With the model design, let me turn the model back on. With the model design, you're going to first go into your materials setup on the right hand side, and you're going to go into the set tool, and you're going to make sure that you place your model in the correct position, your position, the model, and your material. And right now, the thickness of my model is 0.5589 inches. And so my slide bar has got the model. The light tan area is my model. This whole block is my 3/4 inch board. It's got my model at the bottom. I particularly want this model all the way at the top because I want that extra meat underneath my shield. I want that extra meat down there at the bottom and all. But I don't want it all the way at the top because my model is got arcs and curves and stuff, little curves, and the top of my board is flat. So I generally tend to put about 10 or 20 thousandths of an inch skin of material above the model, the gap above the model, so that it has to mill that material away before it starts shaping that model, and that helps eliminate flat spots. But you're going to do that. You're going to position the model in your material setup, and once you do that, now you're going to use your 3D toolpaths. You have two of them. You have a 3D rough cut and you have a 3D finish. So the rough cut is typically used with an end mill. And in this case, I'm going to be doing a profile cut, right? Cutting the part out. So I would use the model as a boundary. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch end mill. Use the model as a boundary. And I do not want any boundary offset in this instance. And I'm going to leave about 40 thousandths of an inch of material above the finished model so that my finished bit has something to clean up. I use a Z-level roughing strategy. I do not ever use a 3D raster roughing strategy. It takes more time. My finished bit can do that work. And I'm either rastering along the X or the Y axis, depending on which way the grain of my material is running. If the grain is running along the Y, then I raster cut back and forth along that Y axis. If my grain is running along my X, then I raster cut along the X. I always carve with the grain. From there, you would calculate that roughing toolpath. And you could add ramps. In this case, I would probably add about a 1/2 inch ramp, which I didn't do, but that's okay. Just remember to add a ramp. And all that roughing is going to do is it's going to rough out and hog away any kind of waste area that 1/4 inch bit can get into and stuff. It's going to kind of do a lot of the work for me so that my ball nose bit doesn't have to do a whole lot of work and stuff. So it's going to kind of mill away all that rough material for me. And from there, and thanks David, Kinsey, and Reginald. I appreciate that comment. Jack, great, awesome. I'm glad you do. So now that we have kind of the rough cut of our shape, now we're going to create the 3D finish model. 3D finish. You have two toolpaths when you're working with a model. The 3D finish toolpath, in this case, I'm going to use a tapered ball nose. Most likely, I would use my 1/8 inch tapered ball nose. Again, I would use the model as the boundary. Now, in my particular case here, I have a taper on the outside. It's not a vertical straight cut, right? So that model, my model should carve all the way out there. My 3D finish, I should not have to allow for any offset because it's all part of the model. But we'll see. And if we have to add an offset, the offset just allows that bit to go beyond the boundary of the models a certain distance. I don't believe an offset will be needed because this is all part of the model, the draft and base and everything. So I'm going to raster once again, and my 0 angle means I'm rastering along my x-axis. 90 degrees would be along the y-axis and things, and I've even seen people raster, a 45-degree angle, kind of like semi against the grain. I go with the grain, less sanding. So I would calculate that tool path, and it's going to take just a moment to calculate. We might experience some buffing. If we don't, that's going to be a success for this 2-computer setup that I'm using. It'll be great to see, to test that theory out. But Ronnie, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that, and I'm glad you thought so about the class tonight. I've been wanting to really do a class on how to approach things, and last week when we were creating different patterns using the array tools and stuff, and how we drew out the vectors of those patterns, whether it be some circles and lines to create some unique patterns and stuff. It really wanted me to do this class, following up to do this class to talk about my approach to design and using guidelines and shapes, general shapes, to help me lay out complex shapes. Simpler, using a simple approach to create complex projects and stuff. So with that finished cut, we can go ahead and preview that finished toolpath and stuff. And while that's previewing, Jim says, did the array session get worked out on the offset? Did the array session get worked out on the offset? Yes, Jim, if you did not stick around for that, it did. It surely did. It was a point 1.999 in both the gap offset X and Y, as well as in the row displacement, as well as in the displacement. So it was 1.999 in all four boxes, and it created that array offset perfectly. So go from there. Now, notice in the word fighters, as this is going along and stuff, notice in the word fighters we do have some tool marks and things, because that 1/8 inch ball nose bit just can't quite get in there. It may require a little bit of cleanup, and so let this finish through. And for you Aspire guys and girls, this is an Aspire thing. I will show you the very quick and simple method of rest machining. Rest machining means I'm taking my 1/8 inch bit here and I'm carving my design, but I can then turn around and go back and do where that bit couldn't quite fit into those detailed areas. I can take a smaller bit and I can touch up that. In Desktop and Pro, guys, you would just use a smaller diameter bit. If you need to get down, like in this case, a 1/16 inch tapered ball nose versus an 1/8 inch tapered ball nose, to get a little bit cleaner around those letters and all. Even possibly a 32nd, right? A smaller, but it creates a long carve. And so you would just use the one bit for your finish cut. Desktop and Pro users. Aspire users have a technique that is called rest machining that they can use. And I will show, it's very quick and simple on how to use rest machining to come back and do the rest of the design where the larger bit couldn't fit. So I'll show that technique here as soon as this is done. And then at the end of that, go ahead and start writing your questions now if you have any questions, so I can answer them as I'm doing this. Because after that, we're going to call it a night, because this should only take about 5 minutes at the most to show rest machining. Okay, so here's, if we look, we see we've got tool marks and stuff where the 1/8 inch bit couldn't quite get down into those model areas and everything. So this automatically is a visual that, oh, you know what, I probably should use a smaller bit. Maybe a 1/16 inch tapered ball nose or a 32nd, to get some really sharp detail. Desktop and Pro users, you would just calculate your toolpath with that smallest bit, the bit that you want to use for whatever detail you're going. With Aspire users, here's your technique for rest machining. Before we get into it, somebody asked how long this would take. A 3D model cut on this project, based on my feeds and speeds and my bits, this project is roughly around 12 by 12. 3 hours, 58 minutes on the carving. 3 hours, 58 minutes. Oops, sorry, hold on. That number was wrong. 5 hours and 9 minutes for me, for my machine and everything. For V-carve, V-carve part of this, you're looking at about 51 minutes and 48 seconds. That's with the raised letters, the V-carve, the raised letters. And then the V-carve all the way down. We've got our pocket, profile, and V-carve 1. You're looking at about 43 minutes on the carve. That's the times. Okay, rest machining, ladies and gentlemen. Real quick, here's how it goes. First of all, take and click on the Z icon so you're looking at this in its Z view. Straight up and down. Okay? You're going to go up to your Model tab at the top of the screen. And you're going to go down to Create a Component From. Create a Component From. And you're going to come over here to Create Component from Toolpath Preview. However, before you click that, hold your Control key. Hold your Control key and click on the Create Component from Toolpath Preview. Okay. All right. Over on the left-hand side now, you will see a new model called Toolpath Preview. Turn off your actual model. Turn it off. And you will see a preview of the areas. And let's go to the 2D view so we can see this. And let's turn off our guidelines. We don't need them visible. Let's turn off our vectors. Let's see here. Let's turn off our vectors. Okay. And let me take my vectors here and move them to another layer so we just see the model. Give me 1 second. This vector and this vector, let's move them to, I'll just create a new layer and turn that layer visibility off. Okay, so what you're seeing here in the 2D view is the grayscale basically of that Toolpath Preview component that was just created. Okay, so all we did is we looked at our 3D model preview, came up to Model, Create Component From, and we held the Control key down when we selected Create Component from Toolpath Preview. Okay, that gives us this preview here. Now, in our 2D view, we are going to go in and we're going to trace this image. So go back to your Drawing tab, open up your Trace Bitmap tool. We're going to do a black and white trace. You want to slide this bar all the way till you have a blank white screen all the way to the left. And you're going to, one tick at a time, you're going to tick until you get the cleanest representation. Most likely it's going to be right about there. Okay. So let me turn the fading off so you can see this. Let me turn the fading off. So with the slide bar in your trace, black and white trace, slide it all the way, and you're going to tick towards the right, okay, until you get, you want to fill that in, bam, right there, okay. If we go too far, we could lose some things, and that's actually a better one. So that click right there is a better one. But if I go too far, then I'm going to lose the detail areas that I want to clean up, right? I don't want to do that. I want to kind of stay, and for me, it's going to be right there. Okay, that path. I need nice connected clean lines. Okay, all right, from there we're going to default corner fit, noise filter, we'll leave it at the default noise filter, and we're going to preview that so it traces it out, and we're going to click apply and then close the tracing tool. We then now, most important step, guys, come back over to your modeling tab and turn that toolpath preview off. We only needed it to get this tracing here, okay? And then come back in and turn your model back on. All right, select those vectors, select the vectors and everything. So select all of our vectors that we're tracing and go in and create a 3D finish cut using the selected vectors as the boundary and come in and change to a smaller tool. In my case, I'll use a 32nd inch tool and click OK. 32nd inch ball nose to get really down in there. And I'm going to calculate this toolpath using the selected vectors as the boundary. Okay? All right. Selected vectors as the boundary. You can even let it offset the boundary a little bit if we probably give it a moment while it creates that. I might let it do a small offset. I might let it go past the boundary lines by about a 1/16 of an inch. Let it finish calculating. Matter of fact, I'm going to stop the calculation. I'm going to change this boundary offset. I'm going to let it go 32nd inch tapered ball nose. I'm going to let it go a 1/16 of an inch past the boundary. So I'm going to calculate that with that offset. That's allowing the bit to go beyond those boundary lines a little bit. Okay? And blend in everything. So, and what it's doing is it's that those vectors represent the areas where the larger bit couldn't quite get down into, you know, to create the to do it. You know, it was leaving tool marks behind, and so our smaller bit is going to come back in just in these areas, not do the whole model again, but it's going to come back in and just touch up those areas. That's why it's called rest machining. It comes back and does the rest of the design where the larger bit couldn't quite get in there. That type of thing. And that's rest machining. If you remember to hold your control key down when you're creating that model from your toolpath preview, and then you trace out that, turn off your original model and have the preview present or, you know, visible, trace it, and then that'll create the vector lines to do rest machining. Okay, I didn't want to get into that, but I figured, hey, why not? And because this is using a 32nd inch bit and stuff, it's going to take a second to calculate, as you can see. But I don't need to necessarily fill in things with dead space. But let's see here. Hey Laney, tuned in late. Looking forward to watch the video. Keep them coming. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, no problem. Definitely watch the first part of this, Nick, because we weren't talking about modeling. We were talking about drawing vectors and how to approach a design using our guidelines as aids to help us create that design, and then breaking that design in its simplest form. And in my case, it was rectangles to help lay out those guidelines and things and stuff. Definitely watch the first part of that so it catches up to you. So it catches, so you can kind of catch up and you're like, you understand. What we ended up doing was after all the vectors were drawn, we then took a moment and we V-carved them two different ways, you know, raised letters or, you know, in design, V-carved it. And then we went ahead, since we're in Aspire, we went ahead and did a little bit of the modeling. Showing the modeling toolpath revealed a little bit of cleanup that needed to be done, which led into rest machining. And we're going to end it on rest machining. This is almost done calculating. And what I'm happy to see is that this is taking this long to calculate, and it doesn't look like I'm getting any buffering in the video. That super excites me, because if you remember in my old setup and stuff, heck, just last couple weeks ago, we would have been buffering like crazy, and I wouldn't have been able to show this rest machining. Debbie says, remind me what format I must have to import an image to trace. JPEG, PNG, bitmap, GIF, TIFF, TIFF, JPEG, JPG, PNG, and bitmap. Those are the images that you would bring into Trace. Pixeled images that you would bring into Trace. Debbie. I know, Michael. No buffering at all. I'm knock on wood. I'm so happy about that. All right. Looks like it's getting closer, getting closer, getting closer. It's got a little bit more to go. Almost there. It's about to wrap up. So are we, should I say. Now this is a 32nd inch ball nose. I could have probably went with a 16th and all, but I decided to go 32nd just to if I'm gonna clean up the detail, I might as well clean up the detail, right? And for me, an 1/8 inch tapered ball nose, a 16th inch tapered ball nose, and a 32nd inch tapered ball nose, as well as a 1/4 inch tapered ball nose. Those four are nice tools, especially if you're working with carving models and all. Whether you're desktop, pro, or Spire, doesn't matter. Those 4 bits, 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, 16th, and 32nd tapered ball noses are ideal. Okay? And bear with me 1 second. Wait a minute. Stand by 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. Hold tight. Hang tight there, ladies and gentlemen. I do not need this outside vector. Let me ungroup these guys, keep them still selected, but hold the shift key down and turn this outside vector off that goes all the way around the perimeter. I do not need that one selected. Let me recalculate this real quick. It should be quicker now. Should be much quicker now. Sorry about that. The outside perimeter vector I did not need. The outside perimeter vector was not supposed to be selected. And like a goofball, I had it selected, and that's why that blue covered that whole area. So give it just a second. It's moving along pretty good. The outside perimeter was not meant to be selected. Only the inside vectors were meant to be selected. Such a goober sometimes. I was so excited about Res Machine, I forgot to look at my vectors before I calculated. It's racing along. Here it is. It's coming right now. There we go. That looks more like it. All right. So I'm not going to reset the preview. I want to kind of zoom in around the letters and everything so we can watch as this carves. Let's preview that selected toolpath, and let's see if we can see that bit go through and clean up. You can see the cleanup start to happen, you know, as it goes through and cleans up where the larger bit couldn't get into. Righto, righto. You'll see it go through as it, gets around that center symbol. You'll start to see it clean it up, and it's going to jump all over the place. It's working on those vectors, right? So that's what rest machining allows Aspire users to do, is to go with a larger bit to carve their model and then come back and touch up the rest of the design with a smaller detail bit without having to recarve the entire whole model. For us, for the desktop and pro users, guys and girls, you would just use whatever bit, is going to give you the best results. You don't have, unfortunately, the rest machining option in there. But as you can see, it really does do well coming back and cleaning up, with that smaller bit and everything. Now, there's no guarantee. No guarantee that rest machining is going to reduce your time or anything like that, because you are using another bit to come back and clean up. So you're actually adding runtime to the carving and everything. And let's go through and let's look at this now. So this is the finished cut with the rest machining and everything. You can see the letters, the tool marks and all pretty much been cleaned up. We would then have a profile cut to finish everything off, to cut the part out. But let's take a quick look at the rest machining time, because it's most likely going to be pretty high up there in time, especially based on my settings. And let's turn this off and let's go back to the rest machining. So, right, my 32nd inch bit, based on my step overs and all that, just quadrupled the runtime. Okay. So I may not use rest machining. I may just carve the whole design with my 32nd inch bit, type of deal. But I could probably increase my step over or my feed rate and everything, because I am just coming back and doing cleanup. I could probably, instead of running 45, I could probably run a good 60 to 70 inches a minute, 75 inches a minute, and still get a nice clean cut, which would reduce time significantly. But based on my standard settings for my 32nd inch tip bit, that rest machining process would be, I'm going to have to make a judgment call on that one. You know what I mean? It's going to save me a lot of sanding. It's going to save me a lot of cleanup and detail and stuff. So most likely that's what I love about the preview. I can see what my 32nd inch bit will do for me. So I'd probably just do the whole carving with the 32nd inch bit and not worry about rest machining. In some cases, rest machining is only a few minutes long and helps clean up things. But in this case, a project this size with the areas that it did need to clean up, it was 12 hours, right? And Jim, I am talking about a conical ball nose, a tapered ball nose bit. Tapered ball nose bit, also referred to as a conical ball nose. But nevertheless, that is how you do rest machining. From there, you can adjust feeds and speeds and stuff, step overs and things, depending on how much cleanup you need. To reduce that time, you can optimize that tool path a bit. In my case, I probably could, like I said, I could probably run about 65 on my clearance pass step over. Really don't need a clearance pass step over, so I could turn that up to about 25%, maybe even higher. On my regular step over, I could probably go from 8 to around 15% step over, and based on that alone and everything, I could probably knock off a third of the time or what have you. But yeah, conical ball nose and tapered ball nose, Jim, same thing. And in my case, I'm talking about a 32nd inch, tapered or conical ball nose, 16th inch, 8th inch, so on and so forth. Great question. All right, so let's look at the time on that with those adjustments to the tool path. 4 hours. So I took off 8 hours just by adjusting my tool path a bit. And, I'm still going to get a lot of cleaning up results and everything. So, I went from 12 to 4. You know what I mean? All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, with all of that being said, we are going to come in and let me turn off some things here. And the reason why I'm going back to the guidelines and all that is I want that to be my thumbnail on my video. So I'm going to let that sit while I say my goodbye to you. I really hope you pick up just one little thing, whether you're a desktop and pro user working with guidelines and vectors and V carving, approaching complex shapes and designs with simpler shapes, how we can utilize them to our advantage. For you Aspire users, maybe a little something on how to take, after the shape is created and just create the components to build it up into a model, and then just a little bit of how you would approach or how you would generate a rest machining toolpath. I don't see any other questions. Dave Gatton, thanks for joining us. Mike, Jim, everybody, thank you for joining me tonight. And until next week, see you soon. I want to thank you for joining us tonight on Spindle TV, your best source for CNC CAD/CAM training videos. If you're watching Spindle TV on YouTube, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. You can find out more information about our training and products by visiting us at www.digitalwoodcarver.com.